Welcome to HoopsHype.com. We're doing Around the Beat, bringing you the pulse of every team. This week, we'll be talking about the Los Angeles Clippers. I'm Asseo. I'm joined with my colleague, Sam Yip, and he brought along one of his contemporary media members from the Los Angeles area, Law Murray of The Athletic. How are you doing today, Ben?
Yeah, I feel good. Trying to get a little bit more sleep today, but I feel good.
And how are you doing with all the, I don't know if you would say turmoil, but all the news coming out of Los Angeles the last couple of days?
This is every season for me. You just have to. What I enjoy is I know that it's going to be something going on. I just don't know what or how, and get up and you do everything because you just know that can't take for granted that things are just going to be normal. Like whether they're good or not. And this year, the Clippers in particular, you know, they're not they're not good right now, and they were built to be good. So when that happens, there's a lot to analyze. There's a lot to discover, right? And so with everything that's gone down as far as Chris Paul not working out to an extreme degree, it's like on one hand, that's like, wow, that's pretty loud. On the other hand, it's like, well, we are into this year's controversy or this year's event that did not go the way that we thought it would go. I'm ready for it all.
So, Sam, what is your take as a fellow media member in Los Angeles? As I want to go off of what Law said, this feels like a regular occurrence. It felt like at first when Paul George was there, would they be healthy? Would they play up to par? Could they follow up the following season success or the preseason expectations of the roster? And unlike all those other years, they're not winning. So, like, from your side of things, is it, I guess,
It's
a regular occurrence or is it
it's
different?
with the Clippers, I feel like it's always something, right? You agree with that, Law? Like, there's always something going on. Like this year, it's this. Right now, with whatever, every week it might be something different at this point with this current Clippers team. I mean, last year was kind of like everyone was kind of like not expecting much, and then like they just defense just clapped down, and then they were like one of the surprising teams, and then that kind of raised an expectation for this year, especially with their offseason moves they brought with bringing in Brook and everyone. And then the year before that was the Paul George with the whole Kawhi signed the extension, but Paul George didn't know, and now like media's asking Paul George about what's going on, and then like it's just getting a little awkward and stuff. Like there's so many awkward situations with the Clippers in that sense, and then now it's kind of like in a way like the bottom kind of dropped right with Chris Paul getting kind of what I don't he's not released yet right now, but he's pretty much was told to pack it and go home, especially on the road trip. And that's the optics of everything, like 3 a.m. and everything. You couldn't wait till the morning of. It just doesn't look good from like from the outside looking in. It's like what is going on over there? So it's it's there's always something going on, but me and Law we're all ready for it.
The ask Law about being ready for it. How do you think, Law, in your opinion, behind closed doors, I guess, do you think this was all coming to a head before like the news broke from your perspective? Like, was it just tension that was just expecting to boil over?
I felt like there was tension. I didn't expect that tension to be connected to Chris Paul as far as something that needed to be addressed as acutely as it was. But there was a buzzword in that locker room for several days before the trip that they are currently on, and that word was energy. Now, energy can be two different applications. You can bring energy into a situation or notice the absence of that energy not being there. And so a defense not flying around, or you come out in the third quarter and you're lethargic and your coach has to call a timeout 2 minutes into the quarter, right? So there's that kind of energy that we're talking about. And then there's the energy of personalities, draining of energy. Whatever status you are at, you don't have something, and then you come into a room and or someone else comes into a room and your energy is drained. So those are two different things. I think a lot of people were focused on the former, but I think as things have come out about why Chris Paul was a problem, why he was a liability rather than an asset, I think there should be, or at least from my perspective, I've just started to discuss more about the latter. And again, not to scapegoat Chris on this, there's a bunch of dudes in that locker room where when things aren't going right, their energy in terms of how it affects others is not where it needs to be in a workplace setting. But you can see how Chris was one of the players who they could say, if you're not here, it's not affecting as much on the court because of certain things. And if you're not here, it's going to be a terrible look for us. But they're losing. A whole lot of stuff is a terrible look. It makes things easier to make and remove a guy like that.
Law, your name was attached to a report that The Athletic put out with Sam Amick and Joe Varden saying a phrase that I've only heard with one other player, and that is a locker room lawyer. And the only other player that I've heard in recent memory being regarded as a locker room lawyer was one source told me that is what Malcolm Brogdon was referred to during his time with the Pacers. And it was similar like how it was described in your article, just kind of the person playing almost, I don't know if it's like devil's advocate, but putting like permutations in the player's mind, or like creating division through like saying things, maybe the front office or the coaching staff doesn't want. So it creates division because your opinion or your visions aren't aligned. So it creates a rift on what should be right or wrong, because then the players become confused because they have the old head or the veteran telling them something while it's going against what the coach is, and it's like almost like feels like a high school scenario. Can you maybe elaborate what like that meant for Chris Paul?
Well, it's interesting because you got Malcolm Brogdon. Shout out to him in his retirement, by the way. There's a lot of common threads here, and I'm getting at this. Malcolm, vice president of the Player Association. Chris, president of the Player Association for 8 years. Malcolm Brogdon, literally referred to as President Brogdon. And then Chris, a guy who, besides whatever presidential aspirations he might have, pardon the pun, Chris is a guy who I literally asked Jason Kidd about Chris Paul ending his career, right? And Jason Kidd brought up, hey, he could be a head coach. And coming from Jason Kidd, that's very interesting because number one, we all know Jason Kidd went directly into being a head coach after his playing career ended, right? And it wasn't a very specific place. He left the New York Knicks. That was his last stop of his career. And he took over the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets franchise, maybe not in the same city, but he obviously played for that team in his best years, his most influential years as a player. And so Jason Kidd saying that, it's like, how much does he know? You know what I mean? How much did he know? Because Chris Paul knows a lot about a lot. And even though Chris Paul has this stature as a LA Clipper, he's still a new player on this team. And why is that important? Because you have a lot of different parts of things that need to be addressed to make this team that is underachieving, better. You're talking about existing stars. You're talking about new veterans brought in, Chris being one of them. You're talking about existing role players who always are dependent on what's happening with the stars. You're talking about young guys who are now getting opportunities to play that we weren't talking about getting opportunities to play in October. And when that's a lot of dynamics right there, that's a lot of factions. That's a lot of, hey, can I get to everybody here and tell them what they need to be doing? And that's before you get to the coaches and the coaching staff. And there's some strong personalities on that coaching staff, dudes who will fight you. You know what I'm saying? So when we discuss the dynamics in the locker room, whose voice carries weight and why it does, there are some guys, their voice carries weight because they're good. And there's some guys who carry weight because they used to be good. And that's not the same thing. And I think when you have a situation like that, you got to get guys going on one accord, and having that kind of division in the locker room, whoever is describing it that way, you need to identify it and address it accordingly.
I wanted to add something in terms of the locker room dynamic. Like, when you kind of like when someone goes to like their regular job and then like there's always like the old like kind of like the boomers all like there and then there's also like the younger people there and they don't it's like they don't get along and like you're there as workers but you're not like friendly in terms of like you're not getting food outside of that. And I feel like I kind of feel that with the Clippers locker room, like everyone's kind of in the locker room, they don't like when you see like away locker rooms or other teams, like the younger guys, especially if a lot of the guys are younger, they all kind of like it's kind of like in a way like a party in a way, especially after they win. But the Clippers is very like the older guys are kind of like they go in and out, shower, do their stuff, do their media stuff, and get out. And then the younger guys just on the side, they're just kind of like looking at themselves, I guess, in terms of like the younger. They don't. I mean, they don't. Clippers obviously don't even have a lot of young guys on the roster right now, which which is also a problem in itself. But I do notice that dynamic, and Law do kind of agree with me on that. Like, there's just something there's like a disconnect in the locker room. Like, and it's not even just this year. Last year was the same, and it's just I mean, that's probably what comes with having an older locker room. Like, you have these older guys that there's certain things that they're not gonna get, like, 6, 7 jokes, with the younger guys and stuff like that, but things like that,
I
like the
don't
6,
know, man.
7
I looked at a Sacramento Kings game and I saw a 6-7 mention, but
Well,
that's different.
Westbrook was doing Westbrook was doing
I'm just saying, you know. Um, you mentioned something really poignant, Sam, and that's the whole. I don't think people look at the NBA as a workplace, and they absolutely should. That's something I learned from Kevin Arnovitz. Kevin Arnovitz, shout out to Clipper Blog. Kevin loved to discuss the NBA as a workplace. And that's usually because if Kevin was writing in the regular season, he was probably profiling some dysfunctional organization. So, Kevin was big on that part of the NBA. These are grown men making a lot of money, but it's a lot close to a 9 to 5 than people think it is. You're getting up in the morning for shoot around. You're resting because you got a long night ahead. You're preparing for the event. You're at the event. You got to be ready for anything. You come in at halftime. You go back out there, try and win a game, and then you're off to the next place. And there's a routine element of it that you're with these guys, and when you're winning or when you're feeling like you're at least meeting or exceeding expectations, it feels cool. But you know it's why everyone loves delving into the relationships of these athletes, these teammates, the coaches, because they know that when there's dissension there, then there's a chance that something else might happen that shakes things up, a trade or a firing or something like that. So those are the things that fans get excited about, but it's the mundane stuff where things don't quite happen that is being worked on day in and day out. Some of it's corny, like guys talking about playing cards on the plane, or whatever else goes on the practice floor, the locker room, the jokes, the fun stuff. But like, it's a day-to-day thing to maintain relationships, and you're all at the end of the day, whether these guys love each other or not, it's a business, but it's a job. It's a day-to-day job, and it's a workplace. And when you approach it that way, I don't care if your team is the oldest team in the league or if your team is a bunch of neophytes trying to figure it out. Well, part of figuring it out is being a damn professional and treating the people that you work with as such. And so I think we notice it a lot more when it's a breakdown, but uh, this is not just something that comes up when it's, dysfunction at 2 a.m.
What I really liked how you put that law is obviously it being a workplace, but how, in comparison to other ways we look at it, people don't really realize that if in any workplace you have, I guess, I don't want to say cancer, but a colleague who maybe creates a toxic work environment, it's obviously going to be in the best interest for that workplace to either, if they can't fix the problem through, I guess in this analogy, through HR or whatever, is to to sever ties. With that being said, is that kind of seems like what happened with Chris Paul, and now with the reporting. what is going on there? Are they waiving him, or are they waiting until the 15th? So I guess he becomes trade eligible correctly, or other players become trade eligible across the league because of the signing restriction is lifted. What's going on there as he indicates he still wants to play, and there's really the Lakers if he wants to stay home, which is what he made it seem like the whole purpose of him signing with the Clippers was, besides nostalgia.
Yeah, there's no team in the league that has to do Chris Paul a favor. People got to remember that general managers, head coaches, and stars decide a whole lot more than individual players, than fans and media. I think the fans always want the story, especially if they are stans. And then there is the media. Look, a lot of media, they're like, we already ripped the story. We just need this one thing to come. That's why media always love the players who talk way too damn much. And it's like no matter what, it's like, oh, I can write off of this. I mean, and vice versa. I think media gives a lot of shit to the players who don't give them much, even when they're great. You can figure out who I might be talking about there. So the theory of Chris Paul deserves to end his career a certain way. Um, yeah, okay. Find me a team and how you're going to do it, and find me a team that cares. Like people are like, let him rank chase with OKC. Okay, OKC has 15 standard roster spots filled. They brought back every single dude who won a championship with that team last year, except for their first round pick, Dylan Jones, who they traded to Washington so Washington could release him. And the guy that replaced that roster spot is Thomas Sorber, who is out for the year with a torn ACL. A guy who was the 15th pick, I believe, 15th or 16th pick. Not 30th, because OKC had the best record in the league, right? So when you look at it like that, it's like, all right, like this is complicated. This isn't, as the Clippers aren't waiving him. They can't, because they're already at 14 roster spots, and waiving him means they would have to replace that spot. And how are you going to do that exactly? They have a lot of salary cap considerations there. So he's going to linger on the roster until they address it. It's the same thing last year. This dude, PJ Tucker, opted into $10 million, which we all knew he would. Didn't show up for anything, including picture day and media day, right? Got on the plane to Hawaii because, of course, you would. Sat on the bench for the preseason game. And then before I got to the airport, the statement was out that PJ was not going to be with the team no more. It was not a situation. That was it, right? And so PJ Tucker, nothing happened with him. It was 3 months until he got traded to the Utah Jazz as a part of a package that got the Clippers Drew Eubanks and Patty Mills. The Clippers will just ride this thing out as long as they need to. I remember when John Wall got hurt, but the injury wasn't one that would have reasonably ended his season. But John was on the roster until the trade deadline. He got traded to Houston because, of course, he did. Houston waived him. John never played another NBA game. So this situation is not one where everyone's going to get excited about December 15th, but December 15th is not June 30th. We don't know what the heck's going to happen immediately. And so this is something that will take time, and we'll see what happens.
Can we just bring up the fact that why has this happened with John Wall, Chris Paul, Eric Bledsoe, Blake Griffin? Am I missing somebody here? Why is it just all very, it's almost like you just said it there. It's literally PJ Tucker, another right there, that either an injury or like they literally needed like a guard, and they just said, and like John Wall wasn't like abysmal, like he like could have given you like 10-15 minutes for whatever, but it's just like what are your thoughts? I find this so strange, and I heard Dave DeFore or somebody on the Daily Show today mentioned that, and I was like, that is a great point. They did it to Blake when after he hit the game winner. So, and it's all after happened since Ballmer took over.
Yeah, I mean, well, If you want stories about what happened under the previous owner, we can get into that too. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, right?
This is better, I guess, in the sense of like if we're in comparison, if we're like comparing like apples to
Yeah,
oranges.
yeah. I saw Baron Davis at the game the other night. It's like Baron Davis under the previous owner got booed by that owner while in uniform. So, but again, let's focus on 2025. You know, we only got a month left to talk about 2025, right? Until it becomes the past. I just gotta say the Clippers have had a winning season for 14 straight years. I mean, the Clippers are going to tell you that, and there's a lot of pain that comes with winning year in and year out, especially when you haven't won at the highest level. When you haven't given yourself a chance to win at the highest level. So these are the things that kind of just happen when you focus on your best players. And that's what the Clippers do. All those guys that you mentioned, for the most part, were not, they might have been faces of franchises before, but for the most part, they just were guys. You know, they were supposed to be role players, guys who are supposed to kind of offer a helping hand. And so I think it's really hard. That's why you see a lot of veteran players when they get to the end of their careers. Like, what kind of vet are you going to be? Are you going to be the helpful vet, or are you going to be the guy who reminds everyone what they did when they were at their peak? So, you know, that's why. Look, I remember Carmelo Anthony, a guy. Just take it away from the Clippers, right? I mean, Carmelo Anthony, he was with the Rockets when James Harden and Chris Paul were, until he wasn't. That thing lasted about as long as this thing with Chris Paul. Look at the lineup, right? Like, they sent Carmelo home after what, 10 games? And Carmelo was an Atlanta Hawk, which the Atlanta Hawks love to put his jersey out there for the people, right? Like, this is what happens. Like, guys are like, I was him. And then when you're not the him that you are signing up for, that's when you get real problems. That's when it gets messy. You know, like, dudes who were always role players, it's easier for them to get along, You know what I'm saying? To go along, to get along. That's what they say. So the Clippers just have had a lot more of those dudes, because a lot more of those dudes, they get in the building and convince themselves it'll work. And then when things don't work, it gets loud, and everyone's going to listen to them a whole lot more because they have more fans, because they were great, because they established that their legacy goes far beyond whatever time with that organization was. That's how these things go. It's happened for the longest time. Straight Cash, homie, one of my favorite websites back in the day. Odd jerseys being worn. It's like, yeah, it looks weird, man. And what you have in this era is, you know, we have all this history of guys being in awkward situations in the twilight of their careers, but we're just hearing about how the adjustment is more difficult in these days, you know. So, and Chris hasn't even spoken yet. He's signaled a plenty. I think everyone saw the picture of DeAndre Jordan, Blake Griffin, and Chris on the FaceTime. This is why I don't FaceTime, by the way. Y'all ain't gonna get me in 4K like that. Chris, you can put that out, man. I'm like, bro, where this going?
I was just curious, like Log, from your perspective, like everyone knows how Chris Paul is like in terms of him getting on people and stuff. Like, there's been reports
Do
out
they?
about.
Do they?
I mean,
Do they,
you would
Sam?
think like most people would know, and then like they sign him. They know what's good, and then they know how James is. They know how Kawhi is, and like, dude, like even if they were winning, Chris Paul's still the type to like nitpick about certain things, and like, James and Kawhi might not be that person that want to hear that stuff from like a player, like if let's see a player, even from a player like a Hall of Fame player like Chris, like.
What do
So
you
like,
mean? James was shocked. Can't you believe that?
but I'm just like,
Man.
when they signed him before the season, like it's kind of like, what did you guys not think, like in terms of chemistry wise, like do they just sign guys? Like, just in terms of like where's the thought process into all that? Like, could you help us and like the fans kind of just get a better perspective on what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, what's funny is the Clippers signed Brook Lopez, a player who won a championship with the organization that he left as a starter, and was going back to play for an organization ran by the first head coach that he ever had in the NBA, Lawrence Frank. And when they signed Brook, which was not a shock to me because I put out a not detailed, actually the opposite of detailed. I do not get into free agents that I'm not excited about talking about. So when it was like, let me put a free agent article out and not really go too deep into any of these guys because who knows what will happen. I did put Chris Paul and Brook Lopez on it. So when Brook got there, I was like, oh, they don't care about how old these guys are. They just want to have guys that are good and that'll fill a role. And especially a role that was not filled the year before. That's my thing about old players. It's like you could get an old player or you could get a young player who is a never was, right? Okay. It means they're an insignificant part of the team. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So with Brook, if it worked, it worked. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That one's not working, but Brook Lopez, different personality. Everyone is very appreciative of Brook Lopez accepting that he's not going to be in the rotation anymore. There needed to be a lot of massaging for Chris, a guy who started all 82 games with the San Antonio Spurs last year, an organization that was in a very rough place last year because Greg Popovich suffered a stroke the second weekend of the season. Mitch Johnson, the easiest thing Mitch could have done is just start Chris no matter what. Even when you bring De'Aaron Fox on your team, just start Chris and figure the rest out from there. Don't worry, you will be rewarded with Dylan Harper at the end of the season. Everyone talked about the Cooper Flag #1 pick. Man, the San Antonio Spurs getting another top 4 pick. Okay, again, we're getting off of a tangent. You want to talk about Chris Paul? You got to talk to Chris Paul. You got to basically say, Chris, we have built a roster. You can clearly see we do not need you. So do you want this? Because if you do, it means you have to accept that you might not play every game, let alone you will not be asked to start. You're going to be in a different position than you've been in before. We want the story. We need this. We're the Clippers. We don't ever talk about our history or our past for a reason. You will give us a chance to do that. And so this was not what did you expect? What you expected was the Clippers to be good, to have anything that might come up be washed over by the fact that they were winning and can, realistically tell themselves that they had a chance to contend. That's what you do when you bring Chris Paul in. You try and Paul proof the roster, and then you bring him in and hope that your infrastructure is so strong that you're just happy about winning, 2 out of 3 games or whatever it is, and go from there. Obviously, the Clippers were not good immediately almost, and so that's the thing. Chris Paul is the constant. The variable was everything around Chris Paul. And they felt like if we do our work on the front end and we're as good as we expect to be, there's nothing that's going to make Chris want to cause that level of problems. You lost games, and you're losing games for reasons that you can't quite put a finger on because there's just too many fingers that you're going to need to address all of it. And eventually fingers point. And that's what you had. You had conflict that you thought was controllable by the roster that you built. And all of that broke down. And that's what made the situation keeping Chris Paul untenable for some folks.
I want to jump into like Ty Lue and Lawrence Frank. Like, I think there was a report this morning about how there was extensions already kind of like during the summer and stuff. Like, in terms of like job security wise, Law, would you say both of them are pretty like they're going to be there for the long haul?
I always will say this, like, fans look at all these teams and they're inspired by firings and changes and whatnot. They're like, man, it would be great if we could just get the guy who we can clearly see. We can clearly blame them. Just get them out. Like, it worked for the Denver Nuggets. It's like, all right, the Denver Nuggets didn't have good relationships. That's why that broke down. The relationships are really strong among the Clipper brain trust. It's probably stronger now than it was 3 years ago. So I just feel like everyone wants those things to happen, and it's like you in the wrong organization. That's not what they're trying to do. Clearly, if the relationships weren't strong enough between the head coach, the front office, and ownership, changes would have been made at least a year or 2 ago. So this is the test of that commitment to stability, if you will, when things are really bad and you can still say, we didn't let anybody go. What that does is it puts it all on the players. Those guys are going to go long before the brain trust. And the contracts speak to that. T-Lue has a contract. I've written this in multiple stories now because that's what you do when this thing happens. You just hit the pinata as hard as you can. You know what I'm saying? I've written the word 2029. First of all, 2029 is not a real year to me, but it's a real year to Tyronn Lue's contract, and that's how long he signed to. And you can't say that about any player on the team. There's no job security like being able to tell dudes you won't be here next year and I'm going to be here next year. And that's where you got right now. That's why Chris is not there, because at the end of the day, he's on a 1-year deal. He ain't worth it if he's not contributing positively on the court to be taken away off the court. And so I know that's not something Clipper fans want to hear. That's definitely not something that people who don't like the president of basketball operations or the head coach for one reason or another, they don't want to hear that. They're like, just fire him. Why not? Everyone else does. They're not everyone else. There's a couple organizations in the league where it's like, that's not what they do. And the Clippers are striving to be one of those organizations. The one thing the Clippers don't have is a championship. But they have, they've won. They're not winning now, but they have won in the past. They've built some equity with this owner. And that's why changes aren't going to be made, even though people are going to try and make it as uncomfortable as possible, expressing how much they would be satisfied with those changes.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I feel like that's one way that like it seemed Masai Ujiri was kind of like before everything went down in Toronto, that like it was viewed that they were going to do things their certain way and like job security wasn't a question until like that ownership changed and everything. But what's with Lawrence Frank, as if there was somebody to be scapegoated and someone to, could be replaced, because I believe Trent Redden is his name, is the GM or assistant GM that is very well respected in that organization. What is Lawrence's? I heard or read a report earlier today that he is expected to be extended. Is that something that you think is going to happen? And do you think he's someone who's just getting dished on for, their shortcomings?
Well, the extension, if it goes to Lawrence, I would imagine it goes to all of his runoffs. That's kind of how they operate. They keep everybody together. And the only way that anyone leaves is if they get a chance to move up. They don't. That's a really tight front office. I would say the front office is probably tighter than even the coaching staff. Of course, you always get coaches who wind up getting opportunities to move on. Front of the bench or head coach. Like Tyronn Lue's first coaching staff, Chauncey Billups and Kenny Atkinson wind up moving on. Obviously, Kenny wound up getting a head coach eventually. Chauncey got a head coach job immediately in Portland. So I just feel like when it comes to Lawrence, again, I will say this. It's about Steve Ballmer. It's about the fact that Steve has never gone out and actually went outside the organizations to get a new front office, to get a new head coach since he took over the ownership, the governor role for the LA Clippers. He's only fired a head coach or a general manager one time each, and it was the same dude both times, Doc Rivers. And both times he replaced Doc Rivers with someone who was an assistant coach under Doc Rivers, including the front office role that Lawrence Frank currently has. Like Lawrence went from an assistant coach of the Clippers to an assistant in Lawrence Frank's front office, like a VP, to now he's the president. So this is not something Steve has shown that he is willing to do. And it's because of the relationships. It's because Lawrence has been a good partner with him. Tyronn Lue, he loves Tyronn Lue. So Lawrence Frank and Tyronn Lue have worked to build their relationship to the point where they understand working together is better than trying to, get over on one another. Tyronn Lue is armed with his extension. So this is something where optics are going to play a role in certain things, but it's the front office. You don't always hear about, oh yeah, we're gonna just announce the extension of certain guys. It doesn't always work like that. And with the Clippers, man, they are always about the stars. We keep talking about guys who don't get, they don't leave happy, but this team has been very committed to Kawhi Leonard and very committed to James Harden. Before that, they were very committed to Paul George. Paul George isn't there because the CBA changed. If the CBA was the same CBA as the previous one compared to what we have now, the Clippers would have paid Paul George because Steve Ballmer was like, what luxury tax? Who cares? There's so many penalties under the CBA that they had to tell Paul, look, you got to be reasonable if we're building a team a certain type of way. The partnership with James is so strong that James' contract is the way it is. They were able to get players, get someone like Bradley Beal. There's a big partnership there. And the Clippers having a plan, a current plan and the next plan, Steve Ballmer's like, yeah, I'd rather work with these guys and try and find someone else to, by the way, someone else from the outside is going to have to do it with an old team and new relationships and no first round picks in the foreseeable future. It's kind of hard to recruit. I mean, LA is nice, Intuit Dome's nice, but that's still a situation where it's not the best situation to get the best guy for the job, if that makes sense. So if that's the case, you can make a change, but are you going to be better or are you just spinning your wheels? If you're going to spin your wheels, I think they've concluded that doing it with the guys in place is the best option.
It kind of reminds me of like when Jeannie Buss was the governor of the Lakers. Like it was known like she would always look to hire someone that coached the assistant coach with the organization. They played for the organization. Like there had to be some sort of like in a way like a familial tie for her to really consider you to be like something for the team. And I guess like what you just said about Ballmer, I didn't really think of that, but it really does track in that way.
It kind of reminds me of Ted Leonsis for some reason firing Ernie Grunfeld and then deciding just to hire his right hand man in Tommy Shepard after firing Grunfeld for basically like just going stale and like not achieving what they wanted, and then keeping Tommy Shepard for what felt like another 10 years. So you ended up having basically the same philosophy and like ideals for what 20 years, because you just, instead of replacing the entirety of the culture, you're just pulling someone who's a part of the same vein. I feel like that's counterintuitive, and I never thought about that. And with that being said, Law, your thoughts. Speaking of Lawrence Frank and Tyronn Lue and all that, what is the real organizational aspiration for the team? Like, where are they going, and like, what is the goal? Like obviously championship for everybody, but you don't have picks. You gave them all to the Clippers. I mean, not the Clippers, to the Thunder. So
Yeah, the Sixers got one too. So Sixers are
yeah,
sitting on something. Here's the thing. You got two plans, making the most of the short term and planning for the long term. And so the short term is these stars who are still there have to figure it out if they don't want to be included in trying to make the most out of a broken season from a personnel standpoint. It's not like the Clippers are going to bottom out, right? So the best thing you can do is compete, which is what the Clippers have always done. That number 42 is a big number for the Clippers. For a team that doesn't have a championship, having the longest active streak of winning seasons is a pretty nice selling point. It's you make the most of what you can do, So, I mean, other teams talk about championships that they won before shot clocks, and the Clippers are talking about at least being good for 5 months out of the calendar year. So, they're going to push hard to be as good as they can be with the group of guys that they have. If they can't do that, if the bottom falls out, it's going to feel like last year's Philadelphia 76ers in some ways. But they always make trades whether they're good or overachieving or underachieving. Um, just the matter of James, Kawhi, we're going to see if those guys can turn around. They've never dealt with playing tournaments. Those guys have never dealt with losing seasons. So, and they're still offensively playing at a high level. Defensively, they need more support around them, including Kawhi. Kawhi's not that guy defensively anymore. So they have to show that they got to figure out an identity as far as how they're going to win games. They have an identity right now. It's just not a good identity to have, you know. And then when you talk about what they're going to do, the reason why this is more complicated as far as, oh, just do whatever it takes. It's like, no, the Clippers, again, there's no one of consequence that has, you know, a contract over the next couple years after this one. You know, I think Zoo is the only one. I think Derrick Jones, like I said, Derrick Jones is a 2027 free agent. Kawhi 2027. James can be a free agent in 2026. There's a bunch of team options: Nico Batum, Brooke Lopez, Bogdanovic. So John Collins is on an expiring. Uh, Bradley Beal obviously has a player option, but has a hip injury that is, as far as I'm concerned, career altering. So um, this team has worked really hard since Paul George left to keep their prospects of being players in free agency in 2026 and 2027 relevant. And I think that's really going to be the focus of anything they do. It's like, hey, look, be as good as you can. But these guys, yeah, they know how old these guys are. That's why the contracts are set up the way they are, so that they can start to pivot to whatever the next phase of the organization is. And that is actually something Lawrence Frank referenced in his discussion explaining this move on Wednesday.
You touched on something real quick. Beal, I guess like the hip injuries, it's that bad. Like, are you? I didn't. That's just one thing that I just wanted to catch on. I didn't
It's a
know.
hip. Anytime you hear the word hip, it's bad.
I
I don't
didn't know it was
care
like Bo
who it is.
Jackson.
I mean, shoot, what ended Bo Jackson's career? If you look at how Bo Jackson's career ended, his NFL career, that tackle, it's like you see that tackle all the time. It's like that tackle caused a hip fracture that ended his career. Now, that was also in the early 90s. We're in 2025. So
But then
any
they also say
injury,
the force of Bo Jackson also because he was like that's like so they say he was running so hard that he like kept moving.
the human body is a wonderful thing. And that means treating it evolves over time. You get all these bodies. Again, I look at Zion Williamson, Victor Wembanyama, like, you know, you got to be extra careful with Victor Wembanyama. You ain't never treated a dude who looked like him before. Zion Williamson, #1 pick, incredibly good when he plays basketball, has a basketball playing problem. Like he ain't there, right? Even right now, he's on a multi-week absence. These bodies are complicated. You know, Kawhi Leonard, incredible physical marvel. One of the most cut up guys in the league, and now has even more magazine covers to show for it. But has always been a guy who is like, how do you treat him? How do you protect him? How do you get him back to full health? It's always a conversation. It's as much of a conversation as his actual ability to contribute on the basketball court. Bradley Beal, he's fortunate that it is 2025 and not 1995 as far as the injury, but it's still a hip injury. We saw what happened to Isaiah Thomas. You don't see Justice Winslow, who should be in the prime of his career, in the league right now. You know, I really feel like his injury changed the course of his career, and he didn't even have a surgery. That thing healed without a surgery. So that is what I'm talking about when it comes to these injuries, man. Like, it changes you. I don't know what we're going to see from Bradley Beal. Bradley was already on a decline. So how does he bounce back from an injury that cost him literal months? You know, all his injuries, that he suffered at the end of his time in Washington and his time in Phoenix, it was a laundry list of issues, but nothing so serious that took him out for, at the very least, half of a year. And that's what Brad's going to have to not just physically overcome, not just mentally, but emotionally too. Like, how bad do you want to deal with this?
Damn, I didn't even think about that. And like, I mean, all that combined outside of just the hip injury, but do you think this just becomes maybe a PJ Tucker situation then, because he has the player option and all that, and he's gonna come back and, like, if he's not in shape, it clearly, you know, it's just history repeating itself.
It's a next year thing, I guess, right?
Well, what was interesting was Lawrence Frank, when Lawrence has talked more than he ever would have wanted to talk at this part of the season. You know, he's had to address the media because of Brad's injury. He's had to address the media because of Chris Paul. I mean, it's pretty much half of his veteran all-season acquisitions right there, and it's not even Christmas. Um, the thing with that is he was always planning to opt out of that player option so that he could sign a deal where he could make the money that he was giving away when he accepted the buyout from Phoenix. And you only put yourself in a player option situation in the case of a catastrophe. Well, this would qualify as a catastrophe. Simple as that. If you're Bradley Beal, you sign that deal and you're thinking, I'm going to play well enough and I'm going to earn myself money because my market is going to be, looking good. I'm going to be put in position by the LA Clippers, a team that was super committed to all the things that Brad was theoretically going to do to diversify that team's offense. Um, you know, and in theory, yeah, it made sense. It's a big reason why I was high on the Clippers this year. I was definitely thinking the Clippers were going to be a team that could build off of the team they finished last year as. There's a lot of people who are like same old Clippers, and honestly, I don't know what the language on this podcast is, but insert profanity here. Like they're not being genuine about the Clippers. You know what I'm saying? Again, the Clippers have always won in the regular season. If you want to say they were going to barf in the playoffs, then that's another topic of conversation. But I mean, keep that same energy too. Like people thought the Clippers were going to be bad last year and they weren't, you know? Um, so people who thought that they could build off of last season, it was more about the fact that they had players that were going to be led by James and Kawhi. Brad was going to diversify things. He was going to be the only new starter. He was going to be a guy who could shoot. He was going to be a guy who could help relieve ball handling. And he was going to be a guy who, maybe who could be motivated to play a little harder if he was going to be asked to do a little less or a little bit different. And coming off of being humbled with his Phoenix experience. You got nothing out of Brad. If Brad suffered this injury in August, it would have been better for the Clippers than the fact that he was allowed to be in camp and be in the starting lineup to begin the season. The Clippers wasted time because of what happened there. That's so yeah, like Brad's going to opt in because he's at a point where he's got to prove that he's still an NBA player.
Well, like, do you feel like the Clippers can realistically turn the season around, or do you feel like what's going to happen is James is going to get more disgruntled and he's just going to ask for a trade and kind of like the whole cycle we've seen with him already in the past with Brooklyn and Philadelphia? Or what do you think is going to happen throughout the rest of the season?
James has always done a really good job of understanding how bad a situation is, noticing how unsalvageable it could be, and finding his next destination. The next destination, that part's a little tricky because one, middle of the season, you got moving cars here. So like who's trying to disrupt what they got to add James to their team? When the Brooklyn Nets did it in the middle of the season, the Brooklyn Nets had enough guys where, who cares? You've got Kyrie and KD. You could keep them and bring James in. Just find a trade. And they were able to do that. And they were able to do it before the season got too deep. Like that trade happened very early in the 2020-21 season. The Philadelphia situation, Philadelphia wasn't giving up much. Ben Simmons wasn't playing at all. So it's like, all right, add James Harden, figure out, make it work. And it worked to some degree that year. It was a little bit better than the following year, but the relationships broke down by the end of that. The Clippers, same thing. They added James Harden after the start of things, and that went poorly until they separated Russell Westbrook and James Harden from the first unit, and then they took off and were great. Um, what team is trying to sign up for getting James? James hasn't been to a conference final since 2018, which is also when James was the MVP of the entire league. Like you're not getting that player. So and I say this with James playing really well to a degree. James is doing really well doing James stuff, but James is also turning the ball over at will and in a position where he can't help this defense. So where's the chair? You're playing musical chairs. Where do you go? Houston is not an option to me. Ime Udoka coaches that team next. Chris Finch is interesting because he did coach James, because Chris Finch is adaptable. But again, who does Minnesota give up that would make this worth it for the Clippers? You know what I mean? Minnesota's at a little bit of a first round pick deficit too. If anyone's familiar with Rudy Gobert or Rob Dillingham, where does it make sense? If you're a team going nowhere, you don't add James. If you're a team that's mid, like again, what do you feel comfortable with giving up, absorbing James, and saying we can be better? If you're a team being great, you're like, we don't need this. That's what makes it tough. It's the same conversation with Chris Paul in a parallel way, because at least with Chris, yeah, no money, but like he doesn't give you anything on the court at this stage of his career. So like, where do you go? If you're going nowhere, you don't add him. If you're kind of like not a contender but good, you're a bubble team, you're hoping to get in. It's like, okay, how does that work out? Like, how do you acquire him? And if you're great, you're like, well, we're great, but we're not great and needing you, so you're not going to play. It's really tricky, and that's why I think these guys see that. That's why it's like, yo, play hard, don't politic and try and get out, make this work. And I think you're going to see James and Kawhi make an effort to make this work.
The follow this up, Law. Speaking about making it work, what went wrong with the same? Obviously, Father Time's undefeated, but this is one of the best defenses. They still have the same defensive coordinator, Van Gundy. The principles should still be there. And is this like maybe like the cloud of the aspiration investigation looming over? Is this maybe obviously what was going on in the locker room? What's the, like you said, they're going to fight to keep this season alive, but w- where's the team, I guess, at in terms of trying to get back to being one of the best defenses?
Defense is more than personnel and scheme. And I've tried to make that point even before um, last season. Like, I was looking at some of those dudes and I'm like, man, Chris Dunn, I think he can be a really good defender. I also can see a situation where even with Chris Dunn getting steals and matching up with guys at the point of attack, that doesn't mean your team is good. You might suck. That Utah Jazz defense that had Chris Dunn and another guy that's a Clipper now, John Collins, they were terrible on defense. So it's got to be more than just who you got, right? Derrick Jones Jr., really good defender, but it's like, okay, how is it going to fit? Jeff Van Gundy, I thought, did a great job with Tyronn Lue, building a defense that protected liabilities, put those guys in position to contribute positively. And then they had the personnel and they had the scheme, and guys communicated really well. Okay, great. But I also saw that same top three defense get shredded in the playoffs by the Denver Nuggets. I mean, sometimes you have Nikola Jokic, but also sometimes guys just, you play a group of guys enough times and you're like, wait, Jamal Murray just killed Chris Dunn. Just do that. Aaron Gordon, just maul those dudes. That's what beat the Clippers. Zoo did an outstanding job on Nikola Jokic relative to how most guys do against Nikola Jokic. But the other Nuggets, as the series went on, were able to beat up on a very good Clippers defense. Well, the rest of the league probably took a picture out of that book. If you just play the Clippers a full game and play hard, like really hard, the Clippers are going to break. And a big part of the issue that the Clippers have is turnovers, live ball turnovers. They don't have the guys to get back. But I mean, there's a lot of the same guys as last year. Point of attack is an issue. Chris Dunn has not played as well. Derrick Jones Jr., a guy who I thought played pretty well. He's been hurt for more than a couple weeks now. Takes a lot away. You're playing a lot more rookies, playing a lot more guys together that you don't want to play. That's a big thing. Like, and I will say this: they played 50 games, more than half the season, with Terrence Mann, Amir Coffey, Kevin Porter Jr. Guys who weren't overall positive contributors to the Clippers as a whole, especially that really showed up offensively. Terrence lost his starting job. Kevin Porter Jr. was a guy they couldn't, they were eager to replace. Amir Coffey was a guy who stayed on the team the whole season, but when he suffered a knee injury, they were slow about bringing him back, and then he didn't play a single second in the playoffs. That's just how it went. But those dudes played with energy. Those dudes played with pace. Those dudes, when you pair them up with what you got from Chris Dunn and Derrick Jones Jr. and the return of Nicholas Batum, you had a bunch of dudes who were playing with energy, playing with an edge. Norman Powell, same thing. Norman, not the best defender, but when you challenge him, and Norman Powell had a chip on his shoulder, he wanted to show that he could contribute as a starter. Not that he was a great defender, but he wasn't going to break your defense. He was going to be sturdy. Obviously, Bradley Beal was not good on that end of the floor and not on the floor enough. So that was the thing with the Clippers. I think they came into this season, they were not as urgent as they were the year before when everyone was telling them that they would fail. No one was telling the Clippers they would fail this year. They were just telling them they were old. And the Clippers were like, we're going to be so good offensively that our defense won't even matter as much. That's how you go from one of the best defenses in the league to one of the worst. And we started this with energy. The energy that you saw in Atlanta, that was their best defensive performance of the season, just as far as raw point total. But I saw that same shorthanded Atlanta team even more shorthanded, blow the Lakers out in that same building. I was there for that game with even less rest for Atlanta and more rest for the Lakers. I saw them blow them out. So that was, to me, an impressive performance by the Clippers. One that means jack squat if they can't build on it and repeat it and be consistent about it. That's what defense is. Doing those things more often than your opponent that night and all the opponents that you have across the league on a consistent basis over an extended period of time.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it there was getting back on defense, especially off those live ball turnovers. It feels like Kobe Sanders is literally the only one who is capable of even keeping up in a foot race in transition with anybody. And when we look at this, and like you said, they're going to try to fight. Bogdanovic is really like the only salary filler that seems expendable. And this is the last thing we want to ask you, Law, and we appreciate you for your time. But is there a save the season trade? Obviously, the DeMar DeRozan thing just sounds outlandish. Like if they're going to make a trade, it's going to be for some athleticism, maybe a wing defender, somebody that's gonna give them something. And that's the thing where like also the guys who are supposed to be athletic, Derrick Jones Jr., John Collins, it just doesn't feel like they're playing with the same bounce that they had a
Well,
year or two ago.
well, again, Derek's not there now,
Derek's hurt.
and
Yeah,
John's
obviously.
never been a reliable defender to a certain degree. That's the interesting thing about talking about how old the Clippers were. Who did they trade to get John Collins? Norman Powell, an older player, a smaller player, and a less athletic player who does not have a defensive pedigree, at least how he plays now. The Norm that won a championship in Toronto had to defend well enough to get the trust of a Dwayne Casey and later a Nick Nurse to be on the floor before establishing how good of an offensive player he was. But if anyone who looked at a John Collins team, not to put it all on John, but those teams were never good defensively, never reliable. And a lot of those teams were better defensively when John was off the floor. And again, you can put that on Trae Young, you can put that on the Utah Jazz, but like there's some common thread there, and that's carried over to this year's team. Like John's big and athletic, and plays with some and a nose for the ball, but laterally he's not very good. So if you have him on the perimeter, he can be beaten. We've seen that when John opens up his hips, it's like boom, you can get right by. John doesn't always recognize shooters. one of the reasons why the Clippers have one of the worst 3-point defenses in the NBA. And then you just look at, John hasn't rebounded at the level that he has in the past. Some of that is playing with Zoo, a really good rebounder. That's what happens. Someone's got to get a rebound. But team rebounding wise, the Clippers were number one in the league last year in that category with a smaller team. Guys, they were playing Derrick Jones Jr. at the 4 with Chris Dunn, James Harden, and Norman Powell starting until Kawhi got back. And Kawhi, all he did was take one of either Chris Dunn or Derrick Jones Jr. spots. Now, how are they bigger and a worse rebounding team? Because they're not pursuing the basketball as well. So that's to your point about, the defense, who's there. You talk about Bogdan. Bogdan's in a situation where he's got a hip injury. They said day to day, it's more like week to week. I mean, we can measure in weeks how long Bogdan has been out. And Bogey has had injury issues going back for years. I think he's only played a respectable amount of games once in the last 5 seasons. And so Bogey was going to be one of the odd men out of the rotation when the season started with everyone fully healthy. I felt like that was actually a favor to Bogey. And the reason for that is because he was hurt in Atlanta. Like, the Hawks gave the Clippers second round picks to acquire Bogey for Terrence Mann. That's you have to look at those things. Be like, why did that happen? Bogey got healthy and comfortable, and he played great for the Clippers in March. But come playoff time, Bogey was not the same dude in the 7-game series against the Denver Nuggets. And Bogey told me that he couldn't do what he normally do as far as like regular working out for a month after the Clippers season ended because he was dealing with knee and ankle injuries, undisclosed injuries. He goes to Eurobasket. We all know that he got injured in Eurobasket. He hurt his hamstring. People thought it was a tear. It turned out it wasn't as serious as that, but it was still an injury where he was slowed coming into camp. The Clippers were the second to last team to play a preseason game. And Bogey started that preseason game because Bradley Beal was not ready to play in the preseason. Except Bogey suffers a back injury 3 minutes into that initial preseason game. Like that cost him a week there. So Bogey was behind. And I mean, now he's dealing with the hip. He's had injury after injury after injury. Bogey's played a lot of basketball. In theory, you're like, yeah, we can trade Bogdanovic, a really good bench player when healthy, but the when healthy part is becoming a lot more infrequent. And so, I think Bogey was always going to be a guy that they would look to probably flip. One, they need Bogey. And two, I don't know what the heck his market looks like because everyone knows his durability issues now.
But let's say they were to even try to make a trade. What would you think is even feasible, and what would they even be looking, regardless of who they would trade? I guess like even who would they like be trying? Because like the players you mentioned is like injured players or expiring contracts of players that they're being traded for a reason, like John Collins, or obviously in this case Bogdan, because of his team option and injuries. So like I guess like what would you do if you were Lawrence Frank? And like the only connection I mentioned earlier that we've heard is DeMar DeRozan, which is clearly not a solution in any like workable scenario.
Right. The only reason you'd want a DeMar is to juice your offense. And I think Tyronn Lue should honestly just try and figure it out. Tyronn always figures something out offensively. They don't always figure something out defensively. But defense is going to be what gets them back into relevance in the West. And so really what they do trade-wise depends on if they can recover a little bit in the second quarter of the season. The second quarter ends around MLK. That's a good time to get all the information you need to say, are you a buyer? In other words, you're looking for trades for guys who can contribute for the rest of this season, or you're selling. And in the Clippers case, selling, it might not mean blow it up, but whatever trade they make, they have to try and win games. They have to try and see if they can slide into the play-in tournament and do to another team what the Pelicans, a 4-16 Pelicans team, did to the Clippers in 2022. Like, your goal is to play this thing out and try and compete through the end. You have zero incentive to do anything else, but exactly. You're basically just saying, are the players on our team helping us, or do we need to just get off of them? And that'll be determined over the next month. That's truly how I feel. This was a terrible start for the Clippers, but there's 3/4 of the season left. What happens with existing guys like Collins and Bogdanovic? What happens with them considering guys? It comes down to how well the Clippers are playing and how well or poorly other teams are playing, because other teams have to get to a point where they want to sell as well. We've only talked about DeMar because the Kings are in such dire straits themselves. There might be more teams that get added to that list that we're not talking about right now. It depends. Maybe a team is around 500 now, they lose 15 out of 20, and they have a change of heart about where they're keeping. I'm not in a position to identify those teams right now, but that is what you're looking for over the next 6 weeks.
That makes complete sense. I mean, we have tons of season left, over 60 or so games. Sam, do you have anything else to add, or you want to ask Law? Again, we really appreciate you for doing this. And again, all the insight was really rewarding to hear.
I mean, honestly, not really, but I mean, with how things go with the Clippers, like every week is something new. Like we can be talking again in like a week or two, and it'll be completely different. So, I mean, right now, I feel like we covered like most of what people around the league, fans, they kind of want to know, like what's going on there, you know. But like, really appreciate your time, Law. Like, I'm glad you spent like over an hour with us here. So, really appreciate it. Yeah, and this is our first one, right? Zero of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, man. I didn't know y'all had y'all own mic flag, so that's cool.
Yeah, I've had these made, so like, yeah, no, it's been expensive. So, but yeah, no, it's a little small thing I thought had to do.
Yeah. Hey, well,
But
thanks
no,
for
yeah,
having me, guys.
thank you for being the
Yeah,
inaugural
man.
guest.
Yeah, you're the first
What
one.
are your
Oh,
social
dope.
media so you can have the people follow your work and your socials?
Yeah, I'm at Law Murray the New at everything that I'm supposed to be at, and yeah, shout out to the Athletic, obviously.
Shout out the Athletic. Shout out HoopsHype. Thank you, man. I appreciate you. And go Clips.
All right.
Appreciate it, man.
Hey, thank y'all. Um,
Yeah.
we got clutch time in Toronto, so I'm a peace out.